Hello, everybody. Good day and a hearty welcome from my side. NGVA Europe welcomes you to our webinar, Giving Credit Where Credit is Due. When we originally planned this webinar in December last year, we could not assume what would happen. We were focused on CO2 emission reduction and the opportunities renewable fuels will have when used in transportation. In the meantime, also the issue of the supply of fuels and security of energy supply has come up, and it's the right time to once again discuss the crediting scheme that would enable us to make use of synthetic fuels, of biomethane, of course, and other renewable fuels to reduce carbon dioxide emission in transportation and offer us a sustainable mobility with several technologies in the future. My name is Jens Andersen. I'm the Secretary General of NGVA Europe, and I'm your host today in this webinar, and I will guide you through the agenda. We had, unfortunately, some slight changes in the agenda. Originally, the participation of a member of the parliament from Italy was planned. Mr. Salini, he regrets that he's not able to join us today, so we had to adjust our agenda a little bit, but no problem with that. We will go forward with very interesting attendances. We will have here participants on this webinar. And the most important thing is to make sure that we will be able to use sustainable fuels by a crediting scheme that would enable the use of internal combustion engines, and they would also count to reduce the CO2 fleet emissions of the manufacturers. This is the main goal. That's what stands behind this crediting scheme. We've been discussing this with many people, with many politicians, and the origin is from frontier economics. A management or consultancy in Europe, it's one of the largest economic consultancies that helped us in developing this crediting scheme. And I would like to introduce first Mr. Michael Ceringa. He's a manager and expert in market design and has led several projects on policies for sustainable transport technologies and also renewable energy auctions. A heartily welcome, Mr. Ceringa. And I now give you the floor, and please give us your insights, your detailed information about the crediting scheme you have been developed.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I hope you can see now the slides I'm sharing.
Yes, that's correct. And before starting, please allow me to make another hint to the audience. Please, you have the possibility to ask us questions. We will answer them. You have the chat function here in this webinar, so we can have also a Q&A session afterwards. So now the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you. So let me start with a very brief background on the benefits of such a crediting system. So we're talking about low carbon fuels, which can be an integral part to defossilize the transport sectors for various reasons. The first one is speed. So these low carbon fuels are available already today, and they can be used to address the urgent climate targets we have ahead of us. Secondly, for some use cases, for some consumers, electrification or hydrogen might be not a suitable option. So if you have such applications where there's a lack of alternatives, low carbon fuels can be the solution and can't be substituted that easily. Thirdly, you have acceptancy. So by allowing a continuation of internal combustion engines with low carbon fuels, you maintain consumer choice and also affordability of mobility and logistics, which is very important to maintain acceptancy of consumers for the challenges lying ahead of us. Then we also have a very important aspect, and that's life cycle. So currently regulation only looks at tailpipe emissions when assessing the CO2 emissions from certain technology options. But these technologies often lead to emissions in other parts of their life cycle, for example, at manufacturing stage, battery manufacturing or for e-vehicles. And these are not considered. But if you look at the full life cycle, low carbon fuels perform very well and therefore should also be part of the solution. And last but not least, an unfortunately very current topic, and that's vulnerability. So by putting all eggs in one basket and selecting a single technology to address climate targets, we make ourselves vulnerable because we depend on a single technology and depend on a single energy carrier like electricity. And the attack on Ukraine by Russia shows us that this can be very risky and can lead to a shock to the whole system, very short term and unforeseeable. So why are we here? So what does the crediting system do? It combines two pieces of legislation which should go hand in hand to create efficient incentives for low carbon fuels. So on the one hand, you have the Renewable Energy Directive, or RED, which regulates the replacement of fossil fuels by low carbon fuels, and that targets the existing vehicle fleet only. And then on the other hand, you have CO2 emission standards, which regulate the development of the vehicle fleet, so addresses new vehicles. And the current direction of this is phasing out the combustion engine, which means that there is a lack of coordination between these two pieces of legislation. Because if you want to ramp up the use of low carbon fuels, we need to ensure that there are incentives to invest in the production of these fuels. And that's currently not the case. So the crediting system can be a solution to align these two pieces of legislation and provide the necessary incentives for more low carbon fuels in our system. Now, a very brief wrap up of the background to our proposal of a crediting system. So you're all aware that there is currently a review of the emission standards going on, and the European Commission has done a review and proposed tighter 2030 targets and a de facto ban of the internal combustion engine by 2035. On the other hand, the European Commission has also reviewed the possibility to include a crediting system, but has rejected this proposal. And we'll get to that also at the end of the presentation. So we have produced several studies on a crediting system. The first was for the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, where we produced a detailed proposal of such a crediting system, how it could be designed, kind of a proof of concept. And we also collaborated with a law firm, Flick-Gocke Schaumburg, who developed the necessary amendments to the legislation. The second study we produced was for Neste, where we looked more on the benefits and functionality in practice of such a crediting system. And the last study, that's the one we'll be also talking about today, is a critical review of the impact assessment by the European Commission, which led to the rejection of the crediting system. And we reviewed that critically, and in the end of the presentation, I'll hopefully convince you that the reasons are unfounded. Now, just briefly outlining how a crediting system would work. So it's a simple and voluntary system, which links two pieces of legislation mentioned before. So on the one hand, the Renewable Energy Directive, which targets fuel suppliers and governs the share of fuel supplies which have to be met with low carbon fuels. And on the other hand, you have the CO2 emission standards for new vehicles, which targets the car manufacturers, OEMs, who have to reduce the average fleet emissions over time, which can be mainly done by either making vehicles more fuel efficient, which is very difficult since it's a very mature technology, or by selling more electric vehicles, because they count as zero emission vehicles under that regulation, which only focuses on the tailpipe. The crediting system now combines these two pieces of legislation, and that's the only new part actually. And what it does is it incentivizes fuel suppliers to provide additional volumes of low carbon fuels. And additional is very important here, because we want to ensure that we have a positive contribution to climate protection. But these additional volumes of low carbon fuels need to be financed somehow, because right now they're still more expensive to produce than fossil fuels. So OEMs need to finance the extra costs of low carbon fuels, but get something in return. They get credits in return, which reflect the emission savings from the additional renewable fuels brought onto the market. And they can then use the credits to count them towards their average fleet emissions, so thereby reducing the fleet emissions and gaining that way. So two key properties of the system are the direct link to the existing Renewable Energy Directive. That includes the fuel definition, that includes the caps which are included there, and most importantly also the monitoring processes to ensure that everything goes according to the rules. And secondly, on the emission standard side, it would add a technology option, which is currently not foreseen, by providing this possibility to also account for the emission reductions from low carbon fuels in emission standards. So what you see from this picture already is that it keeps the responsibilities for fuel suppliers under RED2 and OEMs under the emission standard separate, and also prohibits double counting. Now, going one step deeper in some of the design elements, but also only very briefly. So one key design element is to keep the system, the crediting system, as simple as possible and limit the administrative burden. And we do that by relying on the existing definition of low carbon fuels under RED2, and also building on the existing certification and monitoring processes which are already implemented today to ensure that fuel suppliers meet their targets. Secondly, we wanted to allow for broad choice for consumers and OEMs, and that means that the system is voluntary for OEMs, so there is no minimum quota, for example, for low carbon fuels OEMs would need to meet. And we also propose a specific way to use credits, and that's crediting against individual new vehicles, so effectively making them low emission vehicles despite being internal combustion engine vehicles. And in the regulation where only tailpipe emissions count, would today not be feasible as low emission vehicles. The third aspect is that we want to ensure that emission reductions are effective, so that there's a positive contribution to the climate protection. And we do that by first preventing double counting. So credits can only be used once, and the monitoring and verification systems are under RED2 are there to ensure that this is actually the case. And the second part of climate protection contribution is to require OEMs to front load credits. That means they have to submit or surrender the credits equal to the lifetime emissions of a new vehicle. So, and these lifetime emissions only occur over time, 10 plus years of the operation of a vehicle, but the emission savings would already occur before the vehicle is actually sold, because they would be captured in the low carbon fuels which are brought onto the market and used before they can actually be counted against the fleet targets. Last but not least, also a very important point, that's affordability of mobility and logistics. And we do that by, we facilitate that by allowing for a wide range of admissible fuels. So our proposal is to include all RD2 compatible low carbon fuels, subject to certain caps in RD2. But this allows to use the most cost-efficient fuels and don't restrict it to a certain type of fuel. For example, it's not a system only for synthetic fuels, it's broader than that. And we also propose not to link the country of use with the country of origin of the low carbon fuels. And that's also in line with the general idea of the emission standards, which are where you have a single European target and it doesn't matter where you sell the vehicles. So this is just kind of the proposal in a very, very short nutshell. Now going to the arguments brought forward by the European Commission to reject the low carbon fuel crediting system. And we believe, and we have shown in our study, that they are unsubstantiated and actually also contradict the stakeholder support from the public consultation. So the European Commission brings forward three types of counter arguments. So first, they allege that such a system would blur the responsibility between OEMs and fuel suppliers. But as I've shown you before, OEMs remain responsible for their own CO2 emission standards. They only get another tool for their toolbox to actually reduce emissions from their fleet. And that's a significant difference. There's also no double counting, so that there's no concern about kind of doing accounting tricks where you would apply 1 liter for both targets. That's prevented in our proposal. The second argument is that it would allegedly undermine the efficiency and effectiveness of the emission standards. And as we show in our study, the methodology used in the impact assessment is not sufficient to actually capture all the benefits from the crediting system. So we can't go into the details here, but just in a nutshell, the methodology doesn't capture the heterogeneity of use cases in the vehicles market, which is very important. So you can't look at a single use case or at an average number. You need to consider the wide range of applications today. Some might be more adequate for electrification, some might be less adequate. It really depends on how you use a vehicle. And secondly, the impact assessment doesn't consider uncertainty with respect to future battery costs. It considers only uncertainty with respect to future fuel costs, and that's also not adequate because until 2030 and beyond, there is still a huge uncertainty how battery costs will develop, which raw materials are available at which price, and so on. And this needs to be captured. And if you do that, as we do it in our study, you see that there are several cases where either option is more beneficial, electrification or using internal combustion engines with low carbon fuels. And it's actually also a voluntary system, which means that it's only an option. It would only be used by either consumers or manufacturers if it's actually providing the same service or reducing CO2 emissions in the case of OEMs at lower costs. And it will also ensure that we actually achieve our emission targets. Because if you have a broader set of options, obviously, if one is not available or not available at the cost you anticipated, you have an insurance because you can rely on a second option. And looking forward, it's also a first step towards a more holistic and resilient climate policy, because we are not just focusing on tailpipe emissions here. We are already expanding the perspective to a part of the life cycle, at least on the fuel side. in the longer term, if we want a resilient system, we need to expand that to other parts of the life cycle as well. So this would only be a first step, but it's an important step to take. And all these benefits I've outlined are not just theoretical thinking of us behind our desks. It's also reflected in the strong support for a crediting system in the public consultation done by the European Commission, which has unfortunately not been considered in the conclusion by the European Commission to reject that system. The last point is the European Commission raised is that it would increase the administrative burden and complexity. I can't deny that the whole system, the whole regulation is very complex, but it's already complex today. And the crediting system, it doesn't add much to that. So it doesn't add much in terms of administrative costs. And that's because we deliberately linked it to the existing regulation by, for example, relying on the already existing compliance and monitoring processes set up for fuel suppliers under RED2. And in the future, we also have a union-wide database will capture all renewable fuels, and that will help to further streamline the process. So if we focus on the additional administrative costs or complexity, this is not the case for the crediting system. So to conclude, we need a crediting system, we need more options as a first step towards a holistic, resilient, and more effective climate policy. The crediting system is simple and requires limited additional effort. It adds valuable options both for manufacturers and consumers. And it's an important step towards a more holistic climate policy for the EU in the transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ceringa. And I think it's really the right time to put this on the table again, and much has happened in the meantime. And it's interesting now to get to know what politicians think about this crediting scheme under the circumstances we right now have. And I'm really pleased to welcome also Jens Giesecke in this in our webinar. Jens Giesecke is a member of the European Parliament. He is a shadow rapporteur on the CO2 standards in the ENVI committee, and I think we are all keen to know what his position is and how he sees the view of the Parliament in general on our topic. Please, Mr. Giesecke, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Andersen, and thank you for your kind invitation. And first of all, now I have the slot of Massimiliano Salini. This just shows that EPP is flexible and we are the ones to react immediately. I'm happy to take the floor now. And of course, let me make one preliminary remark. Of course, the situation in Ukraine with this invasion, with the war, changed fundamentally the situation in Europe. Of course, we have the ambition in the Fit for 55 package to reduce CO2. But the war in Ukraine shows that we have to reduce our dependency from all oil, gas, and coal, all fossil sources. And so we have to look for solutions. And Mr. Ceringa very well explained that there are many advantages of the crediting system. Unfortunately, there was no possibility to convince the European Commission to go in such a direction. I just want to remind you, because it is necessary to look into the history. We just agreed on the CO2 standards for cars in 2019. And committing that in that legislation, we wanted to have the review in 2023. So we are 2 years in advance. This is the first, we have to consider this. The new proposal we deal with today from 2021 goes just in one direction, more ambition, being faster. And the 55% as target for 2030 has now been even increased by my colleague Jan Huytema, who wants to have a 70%, who wants to have additional intermediate targets for 2025 and 2027. And just to be realistic, the industry has to implement, has to adapt, has to deliver on the targets. But we will not end our legislation before next year, 2023. It is unrealistic. So then you have 2 years' time for new targets for 2025. Excuse me, this is not a realistic political option. And if we come to the 100% reduction target for 2035, this is a ban of combustion engine. And of course, there are colleagues, green colleagues like Bas Eickhout, who says, okay, that is not enough, even the ban of the combustion engine. But then I would say, okay, what does he want? He wants to ban today our individual mobility with combustion engine. That's not a realistic approach. This is why EPP, and I'm the shadow, rightly you mentioned Mr. Andersen and NV, we propose to have a real review in 2028 to see how the electric success story evolves. If it's really realistic to have this 1.5 million additional electric cars in Germany, for example, and this is just one part of the story. You know that we have AFIO as well, the infrastructure, and to be honest, we have 70% of the loading infrastructure for electric cars in just 3 member states, in Netherlands, Germany, and France, and we need to have a European success story. So it goes hand in hand. Mr. Ceringa is quite right to demonstrate the link between RED and CO2, but we have to consider AFIO as well. So as EPP, we are convinced from the crediting system, and I listened very well to Mr. Ceringa, it is speed, it is lack of alternatives. The low carbon fuels, they deliver, and the e-fuels will deliver on really reducing CO2 emissions. Acceptance is key, and the life cycle is the first step in direction of life cycle. But the last point he mentioned is very important, vulnerability. In this situation of war, we see we have to reduce our dependency from Russian sources. And so we have something we could produce ourselves. So we have so this is really quite convincing. Just for your information, you know very well, but we have to discuss this. Of course, there is a link between CO2 and RED. In the RED ambition, we go even beyond the Commission proposal. We go now in the direction of 45% renewables, and the sub-targets for alternative fuels are up from 13 to 20%. So there is, of course, a question in the political discussion, will there be enough additional fuel in order to have a crediting system alive? That it is not just theoretically, but that we really can have this crediting system in place. So the good message from EPP is you convinced me with the crediting system. I convinced Pascal Arimont in ITRE, who is in line, and Massimiliano Salini, it's not so easy to pronounce. He is on board as well from transport. So we are pretty much unified in that regard. Now we look for allies. You know very well that it's on majorities, and of course that's true. I will not have all 177 members of EPP on board, but a very big part, and we are pretty much united. And in 3 different committees, we have the same direction to go. In contrast, I just have to recognize that Jan Huytema even has people in ITRE with Riquet going in another direction, not backing the 100% reduction in 2035, going to 90 or 95%, and even having sympathy for the crediting system. So my political plea is just, I need more support for this positions that we took as EPP from left and from Greens. It's not possible, but perhaps some socialists are willing to support. That was my message. Even lefts have favored those options in order not to have a ban of combustion engine and to back the crediting system. So if we talk about majorities, it will be difficult to organize majorities in the lead committee in ENVI, but the final it will not. I don't like war terminology in these days. The final decision will take place in the parliament. That will be in June, and so we need to have majorities for those positions. But I'm pretty optimistic that this is realistic, and I count on your support. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giesecke. Excellent. Do you have some, Mr. Giesecke, do you have some time for a question, for the one or the other question?
Not a problem. I'm in. It's fine. Everything
okay,
good.
Okay. How do you see also the let me say the social impact regarding affordability of mobility? We just right now see that the prices for fossil fuels are skyrocketing, even at CNG stations that do not offer a biomethane. They skyrocketed up to €5, and then the station have been closed. But all those stations that are supported or are supplied with biomethane, they are very competitive, and partially they sell the biomethane kilogram for €1. Is this, let me say, affordability? Is this also a topic, or just give us an impression from your side?
Of course, you know very well that this is a crucial issue, and the very simple answer of the European Commission delivering on the Fit for 55 is just no one left behind. But if it comes now to the increasing, and you say the rocket prices, it's difficult to afford, and we will have poverty in mobility terms, which is not something we need as society. So if on the price there is competitiveness, for example, with biomethane, this is of course key. You now see the, in a way, poor approach of different member states to have tax reductions, but you see it is not an European approach. It's just the opposite. It is a German finance minister who says, oh no, there's European law, I can't go down with the taxes. And there are other member states who just say we have a state-defined price and we have a cap in pricing. But it is the contrary of a European approach. And here we would have a European approach, and we would have a European crediting system, and you could profit from this system. And I think if we can have this social argument more in the center, this would perhaps convince, perhaps it's very good, people from Social Democrats, because even in their Sunday speeches, they always say that they take care of the concern of the ordinary people, so to say. And so the social argument is key and will be more important in the upcoming months.
Yeah. So it's a combination of three aspects: the social aspect, I mean affordability of mobility, then energy independency, and once again, we have to keep this CO2 reduction. And this is definitely the case with biomethane, but also with synthetic fuels, as long as they are produced from renewable sources, be it wind energy on the North Sea, or even if they come from the southern part of the globe, from South America. Okay, yes, Mr. Giesecke, many thanks for your statement here. And well, then I'm looking, thank you very much. I would like to look at some questions our audience might have, or if this is not the case, I could go back to Mr. Ceringa and ask him some questions. For example, Mr. Ceringa, one question: how exactly would the tracking of renewable fuels work in the member states?
So currently on the RRD2, you have already national tracking systems, national verification monitoring processes. For example, in Germany, you have the NGVA database, where all the renewable fuels which are supplied to end customers are captured. And this provides the necessary information to confirm that fuel suppliers meet their renewable obligation under the RED2, which has to be implemented into national law as well. So you have a national target in Germany, which fuel suppliers have to meet via fuel suppliers in Germany. Now, the crediting system would just tie into the same type of verification and monitoring processes. So you would tie it to the national database in Germany, for example, and if a OEM would use a certain number of credits, which are kind of matched by a certain number of liters of renewable fuels, that these wouldn't be available anymore for the fuel supplier to fulfill their own renewable obligation. And so you have a national system in each of the member states already today, tracking the fuel supplies. In the future, and that's something which was already part of RD2, but is also part of the RD3 proposal by the European Commission. There will be a union-wide database where the information on renewable fuels and also transactions of renewable fuels are stored more or less instantaneously. So you have now a central storage of all the information, who is trading renewable fuels, which types of renewable fuels are brought onto the market where. And this is obviously a perfect basis for tracking and ensuring that the credits which are used by OEMs are not already used by the fuel suppliers, because they would be tied to certain batches of renewable fuels brought onto the market somewhere in Europe. It would be uniquely identifiable. So the whole kind of infrastructure is already there. It's about connecting it to a new system.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Then I have one question for Mr. Giesecke. We are noticing, Mr. Giesecke, a growing support for measuring the full life cycle emissions. There's something going on the legislative side. And what's your opinion if we come to this point that also life cycle emission will be taken into consideration? Would our crediting scheme, Mr. Ceringa just explained in more detail, would our crediting scheme also be valuable? Would this support also a life cycle assessment, so to say, from your perspective? So are we on the right path there?
So on the life cycle, we were quite ambitious in 2019 already, and giving the Commission the obligation to deliver a methodology. But unfortunately, nothing happened. And fortunately, the Commission was not willing to recognize that the crediting system is a first step in the direction of a life cycle. Yeah. So from my point of view, this fits perfectly in the strategy. But the Commission had great resistance because they thought it was not really realistic and feasible in a short time. They still have this obligation, but we have to be fair. They did not deliver the last 2 years, so they will not deliver in short terms. Their amended proposal from last year was without recognizing the life cycle assessment. But this should not hinder the European Parliament to make one move, one footstep in the right direction. So this is why I support the crediting system, and so we should just organize the majorities, and then we as Parliament delivered on the life cycle in the first.
Okay. Many thanks, Mr. Giesecke. Anything else to add, Mr. Giesecke, or also Mr. Ceringa? Anything else you would like to add to this discussion?
I would just like to reaffirm that what Mr. Giesecke just said, that it's really key that we move towards the direction of a life cycle assessment, because in the end, we need to show and credibly show to consumers who are paying the bills that we achieve climate protection. And that can only be shown if we look at the full life cycle. So restricting it to the tailpipe emissions is just flawed, and it won't get us to real climate protection, won't get us to preventing global warming. And that's in the end the objective we're trying to fulfill. It's not about selecting certain technologies. So I can personally like electrification and e-vehicles, but it doesn't mean that it's something we should do under the heading of climate protection unless we can actually show that it reduces the emissions which are going into the atmosphere, because nature doesn't care what we write on paper, but it cares about the physical emissions in the atmosphere. So it's quite essential. And the crediting system is only a first step. I fully agree. We need a proper full-fledged life cycle system. That's not easy to do. It's more complicated than a crediting system, obviously, because it will include further steps. But it's essential that we start somewhere. We can't wait for a kind of a final solution for life cycle assessment, which isn't even developed yet to be implemented.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ceringa. Thank you very much, Mr. Giesecke. I would like now to continue with our agenda, and I would like to give the floor now to Christian Schulze. He is with Mazda Motor Europe. He's head of research and development, and he's deputy general manager of Mazda's European R&D Center. I'm really pleased that he is joining our meeting as he presents an OEM who is interested in supporting the crediting scheme, and he also signed a joint letter according to this. So now, Mr. Schulze, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And good morning, or I must say it's already noontime. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hello to everyone who is here in our webinar. I'm happy to show you and explain you what is Mazda's view on this. So that is what I will be speaking about. At Mazda, we are committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050 in all areas of operation. And by 2030, at least 40% of all new vehicles in Europe will be fully electric in our fleet, and all other models will be at least partially electrified. Reaching carbon neutrality is the most important challenge we are facing today. It will be an extremely difficult task because it requires transformation in multiple sectors of our industry. When considering the renewal rate of the fleet of combustion engines today, it appears that only offering new fully electrified vehicles will not be sufficient to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. We often forget that electrified vehicles cannot be deployed in the same manner everywhere. A car is a long life and expensive investment for people. A full technology change, as anticipated, requires even more. The economic power to purchase a more expensive vehicle, as well as access to sufficient charging infrastructure so that the mobility requirements of our citizens are met. And beyond this, sufficient amounts of green electricity should be available to power such vehicles. All these criteria are not generally fulfilled when looking at European countries. This means that the progress in electrification that we currently see is not what we can expect to continue for the next 10, 15 years, because it is heavily paid by incentives and addresses to customers who, to a very high degree, have to ensure charging on their own premises and or have access to conventional vehicles as well. As a result of the promotion of electrification alone will not be sufficient and will not be an efficient way to achieve carbon neutrality. All solutions to reduce and eliminate CO2 emissions need to be used through various technologies today and in future. This is what Mazda calls the multi-solution approach. We want to offer the best suited solutions for the decarbonization of transport based on multiple technology approaches. In addition, we must consider how to address the fleet of existing vehicles in all markets, nearly 300 million across Europe, which is ultimately 10 times bigger than all EVs together. They hold the greatest opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions immediately. However, electrification cannot help to reduce their emissions. We must understand that the combustion engine is not the problem, but only the use of fossil fuel. When using low CO2 or zero CO2 fuels, we can make any car emit no or very little CO2. The approach that Mazda promotes is to use renewable fuels to decarbonize both the existing traffic, but especially also future vehicles that can be CO2 neutral thanks to using e-fuels, for example, and ultra clean as a result of the future emission legislation Euro 7. Our culture and economy requires efficient individual mobility to cover our social and economic needs and the desires in a responsible way. Electrification can offer a range of solutions, but for some situations, local circumstances and personal preferences, a combination of a clean and efficient combustion engine with electrification technologies is the best match. This is also the reason why we believe that e-fuels, advanced biofuels, or biomethane have a great potential. in 2030, most cars on the road will still have an internal combustion engine, even if combined with some form of electrification. Therefore, in addition to electric cars, we must enable, for example, e-fuels to progressively replace fossil fuels and contribute to the transition to sustainable mobility. They can help decarbonize the existing fleet, ensure a more rapid and inclusive transition, while reducing our dependence on fossil oil and gas from outside of Europe. Moreover, new configurations of combustion engines and electrification technologies will be developed that can satisfy the needs beyond pure electric vehicles domain. In addition, in regions with lower GDP and lower purchasing power, renewable fuels can ensure that consumers contribute to decarbonization by making their cars become very low or zero emission vehicles simply through the use of the right fuels. So even if the investment in charging networks and the production of green electricity is limited in various member states, they can still efficiently contribute to decarbonization of mobility by e-fuels and other renewable fuels. You might ask me now, where are those e-fuels? When we look around the world, and especially around Europe, we see many entities which have experience with making fuels, which have already understood that the value of e-fuels and biofuels, and which have believed that there is an opportunity to change the fossil fuel era into a carbon neutral fuel era, provided the right signals are sent by politics that this concept will be accepted. High investments in an international framework will become necessary, and this requires, of course, a long-term horizon to make these investments pay off. We need the capability of e-fuels and all other clean fuels to be acknowledged in the CO2 standards legislation, and we need it to be accounted in the CO2 targets achievements for the OEMs. The crediting system, as today presented by Frontier Economics, offers a very practical, sensible solution to this accounting of renewable fuels towards decarbonization of mobility. Having a crediting system for such fuels will enable all investors and all industries to take a role. It provides a clear horizon and certainty for the investment. From a car manufacturer's perspective, this opens an additional way to support the transition and to reduce emissions from road transport, in addition to the massive investments we are making to electrify our fleet now and in the years to come. A crediting system for renewable fuels in cars and vans will contribute to promoting these fuels more broadly and build economies of scale for their use in all other transport modes as well. This will ensure that the environmental benefits of such renewable fuels are fully delivered and their market share reaches a critical mass. The crediting system, as proposed, is fair and transparent. First, it doesn't allow for double counting. Distributors of renewable fuels and car manufacturers have to declare whether the fuels will be counted towards the red targets or towards the fleet targets under the CO2 emission standards regulation. Either or, no mixing up. And there is no blurred responsibility, as we already heard. Car manufacturers continue to reduce their CO2 emissions by putting zero and low emission cars on the market and by buying credits for renewable fuels. Fuel producers continue to meet their renewable energy targets and put clean fuels on the market. They only receive support from automotive investors to do so. For the customer, it means that the new fuels that make their cars greener will not be prohibitively expensive. CO2-based taxation of fuels and the incentive from the crediting system will make it attractive to contribute to decarbonization of mobility. Let me summarize. Electrification is the preferred means of decarbonization of many mobility applications, provided electricity is green and used. But transition towards climate neutrality cannot be achieved in time through electrification only. Renewable fuels, such as e-fuels, offer a more realistic and easier way to speed up decarbonization of mobility, and this was one of the clear goals of the Fit for 55. Already today, there are sufficient investors across the globe that would like to support a post-fossil fuel era by using e-fuels and other renewable fuels. But these investments will only happen if legislation gives them a long-lasting, high-volume perspective. A fair, transparent, and exact crediting system that does not blur responsibilities nor achievements is required. This system leads to reasonable fuel prices, allowing citizens to decarbonize both their existing and in future highly efficient vehicles simply by using the right fuel. We cannot deny this opportunity if we really want climate-friendly mobility as soon as possible. We have seen that this system is supported by various MEPs, such as Mr. Giesecke and Mr. Salini, and we sincerely hope the discussions will continue and will enable the use of all solutions towards carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schulze. I really appreciate that you took the time and joined our webinar here, or are joining our webinar. For me, Mazda is pretty well known also to go sometimes, let me say, specific ways where others don't go regarding propulsion systems. I could go into details, but this is not necessary right now. What I find interesting is you brought one topic to the table, and that's the existing fleet and the replacement of fossil fuel within the existing fleet. This is the biggest challenge we have, and also a big opportunity. They will last for some many years and even some decades. So synthetic fuels would enable us to reduce also this, definitely. And in our case, you know that we are promoting biomethane, or methane in general, but biomethane in special. There you don't even have to do anything regarding application work on the internal combustion engines, which makes it very easy. But you brought to the table, we have also to take into account the existing fleet. I find this, you said this by the way, but this is really interesting. And with your proposal or your support, we keep competition, technological competition alive. And this is also a topic I think is very, let me say, precious and helpful also for the future in Europe. Well, thank you, Mr. Schulze. And after this very much appreciated statement from a passenger car manufacturer, I would like now to lead over to a truck manufacturer, to the company Iveco. And I would like to welcome now Giustino Manzo. He is an engineer, mechanical engineer, and has his roots at General Motors and with internal combustion engines. And I think he was also with Opel and on diesel engines, and he is now working on in the EU representative office in Brussels. Mr. Manzo, a hearty welcome from my side, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Jens. Just to confirm that you are able to see my screen.
I see you now. And there's
maybe now.
Very
okay, thank you very much. Yep, thank you, Jens, again. Thank you, everybody, for giving us the opportunity to be here today and to present the, let's say, the OEM perspective on this hot topic of the decarbonization of our transport sector, and with a specific focus on the crediting system for accounting the contribution of renewable fuels in the vehicle regulation, on which Iveco Group is very, very keen on a positive result in the Brussels tables. Let me just make a short introduction about our group, since we are very new after the spin-off from our mother company, CNH Industrial, happening by the 1st January of this year. Iveco Group is a new company listed in the Milan Stock Exchange, and the new company is essentially made of 3 pillars. That is, of course, the commercial and specialty vehicles sector, the powertrain segment, and of course, the financial services segment. Just to give you some numbers of the new group, here you can see all the brands that we have in our corporation. We are present with almost 29 plants and 31 R&D centers all over the world. with more than 30,000 employees dislocated in almost all the regions and all the market. Thank you for giving us again the opportunity to remark the fact that for commercial vehicles, and when we say for commercial vehicles, and we intend light commercial vehicles, we intend industrial vehicles, but we mean also buses and coaches. We see totally different stories from the usual messages that are given versus the passenger car sector in the last years. We think that we should diversify as much as possible our product offer, and to tackle the decarbonization strategy and the challenge in the most holistic approach possible. As you know, Iveco is the pioneer in Europe in terms of natural gas technologies and renewable gas biomethane technologies. So we are market leader in many segments. For example, we have the 100% of presence in the European market for what concerns the medium range vehicles, and we have the majority of the market share in light commercial vehicles and heavy duty vehicles for long haulage. And we have a complete product offers also for buses fueled by renewable gas and natural gas. We are, of course, one of the leader in terms of powertrain suppliers with our brand FPT Industrial, that is producing and designing natural gas engines to sustain the entire commercial vehicle sector. When we come to how we see the decarbonization challenge in the commercial vehicle sector, we are very much confirmed that this should be firmly based on a technologically neutral view of the challenges we have ahead of us. For sure, we have, and we are still continuing investing in the clean diesel technologies, because this is what we have today. This is what we have as a majority on our roads, and we want to be and to stay committed to improve as much as possible these technologies that is demonstrated to be very clean in terms of CO2 emissions, but also in terms of pollutant emissions. But we are, again, very committed to the natural gas strategy that we see as the only available technology we have today to replace diesel from our roads with an even clearer technology that already today, using natural gas in terms of tank-to-wheel CO2 emission is able to reduce CO2 and to improve your air quality. Our products are fully compatible with biomethane, and when it comes to biomethane, CO2 reductions can be higher and close to 100% depending on the production pipeline of the biomethane. And then, of course, we are committed to electrification. We have a full program of vehicle launches in the next years that is ranging from the 3.3 tons light commercial vehicles up to the very big trucks and buses, essentially based on two big pillars that are the electrification strategy with battery and the electrification with hydrogen fuel cell. We see battery as technology specifically meant for the medium ranges, the light and medium ranges when it comes to heavy commercial vehicles, while we see hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles as the natural replacement in terms of zero emissions of what we have today on the road as conventional technologies. Our commitment is to go fossil-free, carbon neutral by 2040, and this picture, I think it's very representative of what we want to firmly state for the commercial vehicle sector. There is no one size fits all. So we cannot think that we can replace every kind of mission by means of battery or by means of any other zero emission technology for many reasons. One of these is of course the impact on our consumers. It's the total cost of ownership. The other is the framework condition. We need to have a full rollout of electrification on the streets that would require a huge deployment of infrastructure, and we all know how discussions on the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation are going. So as you can see, our product range is a broad portfolio of technologies, of clean technologies, because we really see biomethane technology clean, at least at the same level of battery or zero emission technologies are how they are considered today in the Brussels arena. And this is what we see in terms of product mix, especially focusing on the hydrogen, on the heavy commercial powertrain mix. What we see is, of course, as I was stating before, diesel dropping in the next year by replacing by the biomethane that it's absolutely compatible with our engine technology we have already today in our vehicles. And we see, of course, the need to introduce in the market a number of zero emission technologies to, of course, also to comply with the regulations. And maybe this number would need to be increased in the next years. We will see what will come with the review of the CO2 heavy duty regulation by the end of this year. But you see that we need to roll out a certain number of zero emission technologies already by the end of this decade. And what we see is that at a certain point, fuel cell electric vehicle powered by hydrogen will overcome the battery truck technology, especially on the long missions and on the heavy missions. But if we stick to biomethane, so what we have already today in place and what we have already available as technology, biomethane is something that can immediately deliver the circular economy model that we are targeting with zero emission vehicles. We don't have to wait to have renewable electricity or renewable hydrogen. We have already today biomethane that, as said, could reduce 100% or more than 100% CO2 emissions in transport. And this is totally viable today, totally sustainable, with big advantages, of course, also in terms of TCO for many reasons, including the events we unfortunately are seeing in these days. So we think firmly that this Fit for 55 discussions are absolutely an opportunity not to be missed. Biomethane is the only available solution we have today to diesel. And we are firmly convinced that we need a broad portfolio, as said before, of options to meet the EU long-term strategy. So we cannot rely only on the development of new technologies and betting and hoping on the right deployment of infrastructure, because this is simply too risky for the industry. And it's very not reflecting what we have in terms of technology already available today that can bring to exactly the same result, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in transport, but already today. For the heavy-duty sector, we really think that technological neutrality is key. So as said, there is no one-size-fits-for-all solution. And all the low-carbon options should be considered in the policy portfolio we are currently discussing, from CO2 regulation to renewable energy directive, and also when it comes to charging infrastructure for road tolling. So we really want that all these solutions are considered in the policy development. And then, of course, biomethane, it's something fully sustainable and that can deliver very huge TCO advantages to our customers today. And let me know, it's also we are happy to see what Commission communicated in the Repower EU communication, where they are very much seeing biomethane as a big tool, or let's say as the most important tool to go independent from Russian natural gas supply for our union. In the end, we would like to give you some policy recommendation today, because we really think that the crediting system should be in the CO2 standards. We think that this could be absolutely a flexibility for the vehicle manufacturer to comply with the regulation, and is something that would be complementary, as we have seen before from our commitment to carbon neutrality in 2040, to the electrification strategy. So we very much welcome the previous intervention from Mr. Giesecke, and we would like to send this message. We need a signal. We need this kind of contribution from renewable fuels to be recognized in the regulation, simply because we have already today these fuels in our grid, and they are already contributing to reduce CO2 emissions. And we would like to urge co-legislators, for what concerns the light duty regulation discussion, and the European Commission that is drafting the proposal for the review of the heavy duty CO2 regulation that we expect by the end of this year, to have full consideration of this crediting system in the regulations. And we would like to reassure again all the peers, the stakeholders, but also our colleagues from the other OEMs, that this mechanism would absolutely leave responsibility split as they are today. We will continue to comply with other regulation. Energy providers, we will continue to be regulated by the Renewable Energy Directive. And we want also to say firmly that we think that this kind of system is integral from an environmental point of view, and the benefits that also the colleague from Mazda mentioned before are not only for the new vehicles, but also for the running fleet. So this mechanism would ensure, by means of the additionality principle, yes, to avoid the double counting with other regulation, but especially to introduce more fuels, more renewable fuels in the market that would be totally usable by the running fleet. So this would already contribute in terms of some other policy tools, for example, the effort sharing regulation for member states to decarbonize transport sector. And then again, we think that this kind of crediting system would complement the electrification strategy. And to be very, very clear and very firm on this, we as Iveco are fully committed to the electrification strategy. These vehicles will be in our product offer starting already from next year. And for this reason, since we are fully aware of which is today the policy framework in which we are moving on, we would be also open to discuss a kind of cap to what we can reduce by means of this crediting system. But the message is, in the end, that we need to ensure that for commercial vehicles, the technology neutrality principle is fully respected in the future regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Manso, for your presentation. And as I did it previously with the passenger cars, I would also like to address something. By the way, you are mentioning something which is pretty seldom mentioned, and that's the case that you are able to replace diesel fuel, diesel propulsion systems by renewable natural gas propulsion systems. Others that have not invested into the natural gas or biomethane technology do not send out this message. And from my perspective, the longer we wait or only push for one solution, the longer we will have the diesel propulsions in place and we will be dependent on fossil fuel. Is this a right view, or would you see this different? I think this is not very well known. What's your point?
No, absolutely, you are right, Jens. So we we are fully aware that if we don't do anything today by replacing diesel, we are just moving ahead the problem of decarbonization, waiting for some disruptive technology to build massively on the market. And we think that we are very committed to the term of the transitional phase towards decarbonization. And for us, transition is very key. Transition means putting on the table all the solutions we have already today available to the decarbonized transport sector. And we need policy signal to do this, but as well, we want policy rewarding if some of us is doing this, because otherwise, as you correctly said, the alternative is just to leave diesel living forever on the streets.
Yeah. Okay, this is what I assume. So there's, of course, some pretty hard competition on the market. I completely understand with this, but from my perspective, your approach absolutely makes sense. If I'm allowed to say this, yes, I'm allowed to. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Manzo, and I would like now go further in our agenda and look at the questions I received. And the first question I would like to address to Mr. Schulze from Mazda. And the question is, there are fears that the crediting scheme will deliver investments and therefore slow down electrification of road transport. What is your view on that as an OEM, Mr. Schulze?
I think the clear way forward is the electrification. This is generally understood that this will be the mainstream of activities, but we also have to understand that electrification cannot be pushed in the market simply by the OEMs. That means we know that not all countries within the European area are the same in being able to accept electric vehicles. This simply has to do with purchasing power of people, availability of infrastructure, and availability of green electricity. So we need an additional solution that can help also in these countries. And also, I think we need to be a little bit more open in our thinking. Recently, there have been discussions about plug-in hybrids, whether they're using sufficiently the electric powertrain. But imagine you're filling up a plug-in hybrid with a renewable liquid fuel, and then you use it in the city with a very quiet, completely emission-free electric drive. And when you then go out of the city on a long distance trip, you use a CO2-free, very clean, Euro 7 compatible combustion engine. I think this is a very sustainable view on how mobility can develop. So I think we will not go away from electrification. The investments are massive. I don't think anyone can deny this. We see the factories popping up for all the technologies across the world. And we will continue to go this way, but we must understand that simply this single focus on electrification is too slow, and it will create difficulties for customers to comply with.
I find this, thank you, Mr. Schulze. I find this really interesting because a crediting scheme would help both segments, the passenger car as well as the truck sector, or what Mr. Manzo just described. You are also looking at the current fleet in the market, as well as new vehicles, of course. And Mr. Manzo is looking at segments where we cannot instantly replace a use case with a, let me say, fuel cell electric truck or a battery electric truck. So where it's necessary due to market conditions or due to distances to make use of renewable fuels in this case. So there's a certain logic that both topics should be connected and could be covered also to a certain extent by this crediting scheme. Yes, thank you, Mr. Schulze. I have to go further with questions. Here's the questions for Mr. Ceringa. Mr. Ceringa, can you easily describe what are the next steps with this crediting scheme? It was rejected by the Commission. You explained the reason, but can be now put back to life by the Parliament and will be discussed maybe also in the Council. What are the next steps? Could you please make this for us, as we are not politicians, a little bit clearer?
I'm afraid I'm not a politician myself. So Mr. Giesecke would be probably the perfect person to ask this question. So to be frank, I don't know. So I'm not that familiar with all the processes to give you a comprehensive answer.
Okay. Yes, that's right. Mr. Giesecke, maybe you can help us on this question. Oh, obviously, he's not on call anymore. Okay, then that's the case. Then let's go forward. I have a question for Mr. Manso. What are the specificities of the truck sector when it comes to decarbonization, difficulties to electrify? You touched upon this in your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are many challenges in the heavy commercial sector side. So the first reply I would give is that battery pack means payload removal from the transport capacity and transport efficiency. So this is something we should look very clearly today, because with the constraints to the design of the vehicles, of the conventional vehicles we have today, putting a volume or a weight of batteries on the vehicles that would allow us to drive a certain range that still allows customers to make their daily operation, for us would imply, and for them would imply, reducing the loading capacity. So we would probably need some kind of adjustments to the maximum dimensions of the vehicle, so to the maximum allowed dimensions like lengths or payloads on the axis, to make these vehicles even more compatible with the conventional one. This is just one, but then we have the impacts on the, let's say, on money of customers. So the total cost of ownership. We have the, of course, higher prices for these new vehicles compared to the conventional one, that if not correctly subsidized by member states, would be very difficult to be affordable. And I know that there are a number of studies already circulating that saying that battery electric trucks can be TCO competitive with diesel, or TCO pair with diesel by 2022 or 2023, because member states are giving 300,000 euros of incentive per vehicle, but this is not the way we intend to go cost parity with diesel. So we need to go in that direction, but with, let's say, not only relying on incentives that you know very well and very better than me, that member states put on the table just for a very limited time. Just to mention the two, there are. It's a complex word.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manso. Now I have a question for both of you, for Mr. Schulze as well as for you, Mr. Manso. We now learned much about the crediting scheme. Can you give our audience, this is also a question I received, can you give us, the audience, let me say, a certain kind of idea how a crediting scheme, to which extent, would influence the purchase price of a vehicle? Maybe, Mr. Schulze, maybe you have an idea for the passenger cars. Did you make some rough estimations how the influence would be? Can you tell something?
I think the direct influence will be, of course, on the fuel pricing. And we see here that there are a lot of currently political things have an influence on the fuel price. It can lead to a fuel price increase of nearly €0.50 within a few weeks. If we are more independent of the supply of fuels, for example, through e-fuels or other advanced biofuels, renewable fuels, then this would create more stability. Together with the crediting system, we can ensure if fuels are taxed based on CO2 emissions, that even those blends of fuels in the beginning and later on, also these pure fuels, will be affordable for customers. And I think this is a very important message to understand. For example, when I focus on e-fuels, we can produce e-fuels across the globe in many areas much more efficient than in Europe, to much more reasonable pricing. And there will be new partners who offer these fuels, and a multitude of them. So this will lead to the fact that we can reduce our dependency on few suppliers, and we will have a stable cost of these fuels. And together with CO2 taxation, we can ensure that there is a very good glide path for customers to accept these fuels and integrate them in their normal mobility. So that means the vehicle price will be probably not affected by the fuel or the crediting system. This will be much more affected, for example, by things like the Euro 7 requirements, which are posed, that will probably have a dramatic effect on the cost. But nevertheless, the combustion engine is something in real value which is still cheaper than the battery technology. And we should also not forget what Mr. Ceringa explained. We are always a little bit comparing apples and pears. And if we come really to a kind of more LCA-based understanding, then we see a combustion engine vehicle very long time can be better than electric vehicle, assuming that we have to use in reality an electricity for a very long time to come that is not 100% CO2 free.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Schulte. Maybe once again another question to Mr. Manso. You mentioned that methane is an ideal replacement for fossil diesel fuel. Wouldn't it make sense, or we did this, but obviously the politicians are not best informed, so to say, also about the harmful emissions we still have with diesel engines when using hydrocarbons and cyclical hydrocarbons. And this is not the case with methane. So also this topic, from my perspective, is important also to mention, besides all other advantages we have.
Yeah. As stated in our presentation, so we see very huge air benefits on the air quality also by using natural gas, renewable natural gas. So our messages and the figures we always publicly communicate on the performances of our powertrain, our natural gas powertrain are clear. So we see almost 90% reduction on the harmful NO2 emissions. For example, we are very much close to 100% reduction of particle mass emissions compared to diesel. So yes, our engines are absolutely compliant, will be even more compliant with the next stringent pollutant regulation, but the advantages compared to diesel are already clear today.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Manso, for the statement. That's it from my side. I would like now to summarize a little bit what we have learned today. We have learned that because of the current situation and in order to ensure our energy supply, there's even more pressure on diversification regarding fuels for transportation. And this is our chance to keep technological competition alive. We have learned from Mr. Giesecke that this is under heavy discussions also within the, let me say, political bubble or Brussels bubble. And we have now another situation, even stronger focusing on the supply of fuels and to act fast and not wait for the ideal solution within 10 years or so. We learned that we have a strong support also from the passenger car manufacturer, in this case Mazda. They are pushing also this thing forward and are putting this more on a global scale, because we also have to consider what's happening outside of Europe as well. And I find it also really interesting, and I would like to mention this once again, that what Matza has put on the table, that we have also to look at the existing fleet in order to replace gasoline and fossil diesel fuel by renewable e-fuels from imported into the European Union from areas where they can be produced at competitive prices. I think this is also a very interesting topic, as well as the fact that for the heavy-duty sector, there are some areas where we don't even have a technology at all, and except the use of a biomethane in order to achieve both, to achieve CO2 emission reduction, as well as getting more independency by locally produced methane. Well, I think we heard really interesting statements, and the scheme that has been offered and developed by Frontier Economics is, let me say, more actual than ever. It's the measure that should be taken into account now very concretely, and this is our signal also to the politicians. And this is, let me say, my final statement. Thank you very much for your participations, to the speakers. Thanks also to the audience. Thanks for giving us attention for our topic, and please follow us and keep supporting us. Let's fight for the best solution for each use case. Many thanks and have a nice day.